Good morning, Jessica. I am so happy that you are here. Jessica is a mother of two daughters, and we're going to be talking today about the mother load and what that means to you and what we can do to lighten it, or what are the ways that she uses to lighten the mother load. So I'm Kayla, and I'm going to be your conversationalist today within our program called the Mother Load. So we are just going to dive right in, Jessica, and you are going to tell me all of the ways that motherhood is heavy.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Um, I thought your question of just like asking what the mother load was such a beautiful question to sit with in general. So often we as mothers are just like focused on what needs to be done or what we want to happen, and all while trying to like emit or embody this never ending positivity and like all the things that are great. And like it's only with our like really good friends that we really talk about how shitty things are sometimes. Like we save all of that for the people that we feel safe with. And I think it's really cool how moms in general are starting to kind of just like open up about that right from the get-go and be like, okay, like yeah, they're great, it's going to fill your cup in ways you never heard before and all of that, but also like there's some shit that you're going to run into and it's going to be hard, and I need you to know that I'm here to help, and these are the things that I've tried, and like also coming with the disclaimer that like any of the things that I suggest to you might be like absolutely not right for your family, and that's fine. So like do you, and just like holding support for that, I think is really cool. Um, because motherhood is heavy, like regardless of whether your kid's in perfect health and everything's going right, like the day in and the day out, and like the long thankless hours of nurturing someone and being that safe space for them to have their own emotions and work through all of that, like that, and like that emotional labor in of itself is exhausting, and you do it for years, and like especially if you have subsequent children, like right, like you get to the point where you're like a year out from having to be that constant with your oldest, and then you throw yourself back into newbornhood and you do it over again, maybe you do it again. That doesn't account for like any kind of the heaviness that comes with grief, like if you experience loss or something like that. That's like a whole other level of heaviness that comes with motherhood, and even the worry that you feel about the what ifs or your worst case scenarios, like the heaviness that comes from the worrying that we do as moms. There's there's a lot of things that are heavy. Um, being taking on that responsibility of like building bridges between worlds, whether that's between like you and your partner and your child, or like their care provider and your child, or like maybe even like people of different generations within your family and friend group, and like we're all learning in this together, we're all hopefully making progress and like constantly aiming to better our best. And as moms, we take on a lot of responsibility in that, in trying to like create a space where our kids can thrive and grow and make mistakes and like have those bumps and bruises without it being as coming at such an expense that it might in the outside world, where people are just like automatically not caring for them with the same depth that you do, right? And I think the heaviest part of motherhood is often like when moms reach that point of realizing that there's this really big level of like parenting yourself when you're parenting your kids, like the radical responsibility that comes with like being like, okay, like I learned this pattern and I have to unlearn this pattern, and like, oh, like I opened my mouth and my parents came out and I didn't want to do that, or like like there's all of these things that you have to start to become aware of within yourself in order to parent your kids the way that you want to. And that, for some of us it means therapy, for some of us it means like just getting out of the house more and taking care of our own social needs. For some of it it's like getting the basics of like having time for showers and eating, and other people it's childcare so that you have that time to yourself, or like cleaners so that you're not you know, you can be present with your kids instead of cleaning the house all the time. Like there's tons of different ways we can find support to make room for that, but we can't ask for any of that without first becoming aware of where the heaviest parts of motherhood are in our life, so that we can be like, okay, I got this part and this part because I can handle that and it doesn't feel overwhelming. But like over here, I have this huge elephant that I don't want to tell anybody about, but I'm really struggling with. So
Yeah.
it kind of, I feel like the mother load like challenges us to really include ourselves in our considerations and our expectations. And, you know, like everybody says, you can't pour from an empty cup. And we all grow up hearing it and being like, oh, yeah, it goes by so fast and can't pour from an empty cup. And then you become a mom, and that becomes so much more tangible than just this phrase that you hear adults say. Like you have this deep understanding, like in your body, where you're just like, oh, that's what that means.
Yeah. And this is like, this is what um, def, defeated or like, not defeated. That's not the word I'm picking of. Like depleted. This is like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what depleted actually feels like. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I ever felt deflated, deflate. I'm like not getting that word right today.
Yeah, this is
I'm like merging both words together.
yeah,
um, and I don't think I ever felt the depths of that
right.
until
Like you can be tired, or
totally.
like, you know, I'd
Yeah.
like to see my friends more, and then you spend like, you know, a winter in Saskatchewan with your newborn, not seeing anybody the whole time, and you're just like, wow, I had friends before this,
Yeah.
and like, you know, I had like, there's just like this whole grieving process that goes with your old life and the new life. And even within, like, you know, with kids, like everything changes day to day. It's not even grieving your old life and then you're a mom. Like motherhood changes day to day, it changes child to child, it changes developmental stage to developmental stage. And like nobody can account for that. Like you can have a million people tell you all the stories about what happened with them and how they dealt with it or what their friend went through, and none of it really prepares you for what you're going to be given
Yeah.
and what your family life and your home life is going to look like. And you know, that doesn't even account for like, do you have support, do you have family and friends close by, like do you, are you a mom that's like expecting to go back to work in a certain amount of time, are you deciding whether or not you want to stay home. Throw in the pandemic and you've got moms that are like, do I send my kid to school? Can I even, do I have the capacity for homeschooling while I'm working? Like, you know, there's so many other things. And for our house, we also have a split home. Like my daughters have two homes because her dad and I are separated. And so there's like, you know, there's different things going on at dad's house. There's different routines at mom's house, and like trying to make that all cohesive for them. And yeah, like nobody knows what's going on because none of us have ever lived through a pandemic or anything. And, you know, the weight that's coming right now for me is just wondering like what my kid's life is going to be like. Like, you know, we grew up having this idea of what adulthood meant because we saw all the grown-ups around us experiencing that. And I don't feel overly confident in that blueprint for my kids right now. Like, you know, like what's their life going to look like in 10 years? Is school, like is university and schooling all going to be based online? And, you know, like they're gonna like be 30 years old and still toting masks around because like we don't know if that person over there is coughing and sick or if they're just like clearing their throat. And you know, the mental weight that comes with even just like the fear of getting sick from everybody around us, right? Like trying to teach the kids to, you don't want to be scared of people, but you're also trying to teach them to be safe. And kids don't have that like cognitive ability to really differentiate the two. They're so blended for kids.
Yeah.
And it's just like, Jesus, like are we doing okay? Like are we like making the right choices? Are these choices going to change in like 5 years? Like are we going to wish we did something different? Like we don't know.
Yeah. And then like, am I giving them enough info? Am I giving them like the equilibrium number of pieces of information, right? Like
Yeah.
enough information so that they're informed, but not so much information so that they are afraid or we're actually creating anxious thoughts from
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
providing them with information, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, and what does that look like? I mean, I'm an adult and I still am like, okay, how do I put my mask on? Like, what is the like
Yeah.
evidence-based way to like put my mask on? Or
The loop.
like the loops, only touch the loops, right? But
Right.
you get caught up in it, and so that like the first
Mhm.
day of school for me, my first thought was because you can't go in, like you just like you had to like drop them off
Yeah.
at the fence, and
Yeah.
and it was like, did I give him enough information that he can navigate this like new world
Right.
on his own? And then there's also like this piece, I feel like there's a piece of the puzzle around just like trust, right? Like trusting the other people now who we've exposed
Yeah.
ourselves to um, be reminding our children how to navigate this new world,
Mhm.
right? Like, I mean, when I was in kindergarten, it was like supplies everywhere, right? Like just grab the crayons,
Mhm.
grab the books, grab the whatever. And now it's like you have your seat and your bin and your things. So um,
Yeah.
I really loved what you said. I
Right.
want to go back to this point of like building the bridges. And so tell me how you have built your bridges in order to lighten your load.
A lot of it has come in from just letting go of control. Like letting people help me. A lot of even just the awareness of realizing that it's okay to let people to help me, or realizing that I wasn't letting people help me, came after like the first 2 years at home with with my oldest, and not going out or like not going anywhere that I couldn't take her with me, and like, you know, losing friendships because some people didn't want to accommodate for a newborn. Like I had my oldest when I was like 24, so a lot of my friends at that time weren't in long-term relationships, weren't really doing family planning, and they just focused on their careers. And now we're kind of switched where like they're all feeling behind because they don't have families, and then I'm feeling behind because I don't have a career, right?
Right.
And so for me, a lot of the building bridges was just like, like it makes me think of that diagram when we make webs, where you have like this, like Jesska getting support, and then it was like, letting each grandparent have one day with the kids, like sending Autumn into Prairie Sky because like I was worried about her ability to thrive in like a traditional school setting because she's very high needs. She's super sensitive to the world around her, and like her learning style is different. And just like actually allowing other people to help, and just like building that experience of repeatability so that I knew that I had people that I can trust. And even now, like I've got 4 people that I'm like 100% okay with providing care for my kids, but I'm like, I have 4 people though. And like I've made friends that have kids of their own, and that's allowed my circle to grow because I know that those parents also get it, and we all parent in a similar style. So it's like, like not only do my friends have kids that my kids can play with, but they're also like, we can help each other out too, because we're, as they say, we're all in this together. And that's not just regarding the pandemic. Like moms for forever have been, teaching each other and like collectively working together in communities. And I think right now there's a big push to bring those communities back, because there was a long time where, especially for our generation, we didn't have that. Like we didn't have our aunties and our grandmas living in our house, helping with our babies, teaching us stuff. Like a lot of us, didn't even really grow up in big families where we had aunties and, kids running around and stuff. Like I have a lot of friends that didn't have big groups of cousins. And with my family, like, we had 4 or 5 aunties. There was always a gaggle of kids running around in the house. My one aunt had a daycare. So, like, I was exposed to various ages of kids from a really young age, and just like grew into the second nature of how to, help kids deal with their emotions. And like psychology helped me understand like the limitations that kids have because they're not developed enough to think the way that we do. And we try and break stuff down in a way that we would understand if we were like 5 years younger, not really understanding that their brain literally doesn't work that way. Like those wires aren't merged, like those pathways aren't fixed yet. Like it's all just conceptual. And yeah, and therapy has been huge for me too. Like just dealing with my own shit and my own hangups and my own patterns so that I'm not passing those on to my kids because it's uncomfortable to work through. That's probably been the biggest thing that's lifted the weight. Like, you know, things are still heavy and I still feel guilty. And like even this weekend, my oldest went for an ADHD assessment. And right before the assessment, I was feeling really crappy because ADHD is genetic. And so, hello, that's for me. And, you know, just realizing that like she carries the weight of a lot of the patterns that I have, like with her anxiety and her worrying and like her sensitivity to like rejection or being dismissed and, you know, like feeling overwhelmed and kind of shutting down. Like I see all of the things that I'm struggling with and working through in her. And even having the assessment kind of took me from a place of like feeling really heavy about that and feeling guilty about where she's at to realizing that I built that bridge for her to have the resources that I never got. And, you know, like her life is going to be so different because of this assessment and her having those resources and me like taking the time to learn that about myself so that I could see it in her and then help her, you know, navigate life differently because I didn't have that option. And like it's not like, you know, there's not a lot of information about girls with ADHD at the time, so it's not necessarily like anybody's fault. Like my parents were great and they did a lot for me, but the things that I lacked are not going to be things that Autumn lacks. And, you know, like just letting other people step in and help you raise your kids is really the biggest way to lighten any of the load for motherhood because there's only so much that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you said that so eloquently. And I think that's a great note for us to end on today, just because
Yeah,
the outsourcing is something that I talk about in my therapy practice all the time, and it's really great in theory
absolutely.
to be able to say like, oh yeah, grandma comes over for sleepovers, or oh, like it's really easy to talk about some of those things, but it's also really difficult to get to that
Mhm.
place of trusting another human, especially
Right.
um especially if there's trust stuff for yourself, there's guilt, like everything is in layers, right? Like maybe
Yeah,
you don't even
absolutely.
like your mother-in-law, so like you almost use it as like a as a manipulative tool, right? Like nope, she cannot come over for sleepovers because I actually don't even like you. It has nothing to do if that person is safe, but we've created this like, nope, I'm good, no help from you, thank you, I'd rather
Absolutely.
not. And so there's so many layers to that. um
Sorry, my computer's dying.
it's all good. Yeah, there's so many layers to just that, like the acceptance and the allowing for other people
Mhm.
to help you raise
Absolutely.
the people who are most dearest to you. Like literally, I have this metaphor for my boys, and it's like my heart is literally out there in the world walking around. Like
Absolutely.
two
Absolutely.
pieces of my heart have legs, they have their own feelings, they are going to get hurt, they are going to do things that I disapprove of, or
Yeah.
and equally they're going to do things um, that make me feel really uncomfortable because I've given them the safety parameters to experiment and
Yeah.
be
Absolutely.
humans and do all of that. And
Mhm.
so I really thank you for having this conversation with me. And
Yeah, of
um,
course.
if anybody who is listening is struggling with the idea of outsourcing or allowing other people to walk the parenting journey with you, I encourage you to reach out to anybody who will listen around what your barriers are and kind of drop down into that sensation of is it a safety concern, is it trust, is it guilt, is it shame, what is kind of lurking underneath the
Yeah.
um,
And
the
pay attention to the people that like make that time for your kids. Like I have had, particularly in the last year, new people come into my life that have really, really surprised me with their dedication and commitment to helping me raise my kids. Like they come from families that don't have a lot of kids. They're like, you know, they have partners and stuff, but they're not in like doing any kind of family planning. And the love that they come in and bestow on my kids, and like the way that they're present with my kids, like I think a lot of times when we think of like the fun aunties and uncles and stuff, or like our friends that are the fun people for our kids to see, we're like, okay, like it's nice that they're playing, but we don't often really like take the time to recognize like the full picture of how important it is for kids to have people that don't have kids or don't have families, and see that they can still relate to them. Like they don't have to have a friend that's a parent in order for them to be understood. Like there's people out in the world that don't have anything to do with
Yeah.
their family or their school group that can still get down on their level and be there for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very well said. Thank you so much, Jessica,
No
for joining
problem.
us
Thank
today.
you.
And I appreciate everything that you've said and sharing your story with us,
Yeah,
and being vulnerable in this space. So thank you so much. And
thank
tune in
you.
for our next episode of The Motherload.
Bye.